This is the assembly instructions for the TARDIS Little Free Library. To begin with, you're going to unpack the package and you'll find you've got a number of pieces. First piece, not necessarily in any order, is the back panel. You will also have a shelf. You will also have the bottom. You will have two side panels. They can be identified easily by the cleats on the inside of them. You will have two doors. The easiest way to identify them is that they already have the hinges attached to them. You will have the top assembly. We'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. Then you will have the light and 4 window frames. The window frames are all identical, so none of them necessarily have to be on a door or a side panel. They're interchangeable. They can go anywhere. Step 1 is going to be, you'll need to take a look at whether or not any of this needs to be lightly sanded. The only reason that would be true is that during transportation it may have been exposed to some moisture and the grain may have been raised a little bit. Other than that, it is basically ready to begin work on. Step 1 needs to be paint. This is going outside, so it needs a good exterior grade of primer put on it. I would put that on while it is disassembled like this. You have the advantage of the window frames being loose, so you can paint to your heart's content. You don't have to worry about getting paint on the Lexan of the windows themselves. I would prime every surface. It is assembled thus far with a waterproof glue. You can be a little bit sloppy because some of it doesn't matter. You have to work a little bit around the edges of the window, and if you want to be nice, you need to avoid painting the hinges. The top exposed roof, if you will, is fiberglass, and it may not like a brushed primer. It's been sanded, so it actually has a surface that will accept paint. You may find that the paint won't stick on it, it'll slide around, in which case I would recommend using a automotive primer or whatever in a spray can and just spray the surface down. It's basically all been sanded and flushed, so it's in shape ready to be painted. The only real masking you probably need to do is you don't want to paint the tube on the light. So once that is done and dry, I would probably put the finish coat of, needless to say, blue paint on it before I started assembling it. You might want to touch that paint up after it's assembled, because there are some places where you might want to paint over a screw head and make it disappear, or you may scratch it up a little bit as you put it together. But I would put at least the first coat of finish paint, the blue, on it before I begin assembly. Now let's talk about assembly. In addition to all the things that you saw earlier, you've also got a package that has hardware in it, which has screws, some nails, some odds and ends, a little bit of everything. First of all, you don't have to assemble it in this exact order. However, I think you'll find it's probably the easiest way to put it together. Start with the bottom, and you'll notice, I'll just point out here, the bottom has some screw holes in it. It is designed to be mounted on a wood 4x4 post. These holes are for number 8 or number 10 screws, and I'd probably use a 2.5 inch or 3 inch long screw into the post. On the underside, you may want to add some steel angle brackets or whatever to provide additional support, keep it from wobbling, etc. I didn't drill those holes because I don't know what you might want to use or what the situation will be. In any case, step 1 in assembly is to take the back, we'll assume it's painted, and the bottom. And the bottom goes on like that. The easiest way to identify it is the front edge doesn't have any holes for screws in it, the back edge does. In your hardware pack, you have a bunch of screws. They're all interchangeable, with the exception of the two long ones that hold the light fixture on. They're all exactly the same. Oh, I take that back. There's also screws for the hinges there. This can be done by hand. I'm going to do it by drill simply because it's quicker. When you put these things together, I would do it with a waterproof glue. And my glue of choice, Franklin's Tight Bond 2, which is very waterproof and a wonderful glue. You could put it together without glue, but it's going to be out in the weather, and I would really suggest strongly that you want to support it. Okay, assuming I've got all those screws in, the next step is to put on the side panels. Doesn't matter which panel you put on first. Set the panel down. The front is pretty obvious because that's where the holes are for the hinges. Put the box to this point on top. The side panel sticks out a little bit in front. There's a reason for that. I'm going to put a couple of screws in this guy. There are actually more, but I'm just going to knock it together long enough so you can see what goes on. And once you have done that, the other joint, and this all wants to be glued at the same time, is this cleat all the way up the back side. Again, I'm only going to put in one just to hold it together. Once that is done, you can turn it over and do exactly the same thing on the other side. Doesn't make any difference which one goes first. Again, sticks out a little bit on the front, should be flush on the back. And again, and this should all be glued, which may be another reason that you want to touch up the paint afterwards, is some of that glue may end up squeezing out and you might want to cover it up. Okay, I now have the basic shelf. You could, if you wish, put in the shelf at this time. Pretty obvious which side of the shelf is up based on the countersinks for the screws. It basically just sits in, screws go down. I'm going to leave it out simply because it's easier for me to do some other things along the way. You could put it in now, you could put it in later, it really doesn't change anything. The next piece that goes on is the top. The top sits inside and then slides all the way to the back. Again, the front cleat on the top will be deeper than this front edge. There are cleats on the back and on both sides, and you'll need to put screws into those as is appropriate. For the moment, I'm only going to put one in each side, which is enough to do what I need to do. Now, the next thing you have, in fact, almost the last thing you have, are the doors. Hinges make it pretty obvious which door is the right one and which one is the left one. For this, you go to your hardware pack. You'll find a much shorter hinge screw. Holes are all piloted. There's really nothing to doing them. I would make a point of do not drive these too tight. They need to be snugged up. They certainly need to support the hinge. But you're going into the edge ply of plywood, and it is very easy to actually strip them out and lose what holding power they have. So we've got one door on. Obviously you'll be putting in all the screws. Now we'll do the other door. I just realized that I skipped a step that I probably needed to explain earlier, but I can do that just as well now. I can't do the step just as well now, but I can explain what it is. Oops. I should edit that out, but I'm not going to bother. And now both doors are on. The step that I skipped is that these guys, the window frames, need to go on. They are made to just sit in here. You can slide them around a little bit because they're a little undersized, and that's by design. These need to go on with the tack nails that I'm going to include, and I would put a couple or three in each face. I'm not going to pre-drill those holes because each one can be a little bit different, but that's the end view of what you're going to look at. The reason you want to paint it loose is obviously it's not much fun to paint with, trying to keep it off of the plexiglass in the background. I would do these while these panels are still flat and not tied up to other things. So we'll assume I did that. Now the next thing I want to do, the last thing I want to do with the doors, is I'll need to put the catches on, and I don't have those in the picture, but they will be in your hardware packet. And once the catches are on, then I need to put the handles on, which are in your hardware packet, and two more last steps. Because this is exposed to the weather and because you've got books inside, it needs to be weather stripped. And so there are three places where you need to put weather stripping on it, and that is across this top cleat, across the bottom cleat, and down the astragal of the door. What I would suggest using, I don't know exactly what will be available for you locally. This is a pretty typical door and window weather stripping. It's about 1/8 of an inch thick, which means that when the door is closed and latched, it'll bump up against it and hold it nicely. You can see from the design that the door is actually designed, you have to close the left one first and you have to open the right one first. One last thing to put on, you have two really long screws, and those go right here on the back side to hold the light in place. The light is purely cosmetic. It does not light up. I could have made it light up, but it was one of two options: either make it run on real electricity, in which case then you'd have to have power to it, obviously, or I could have made it run on a battery, and I just gave that some thought and decided, you know, the battery isn't going to last that long. There's really not much point in making it light up. So there is your TARDIS little free library. A couple of things you can add, one of which I will throw in with the package. There's a sign that goes here. On a regular TARDIS it says police come to all the calls, etc., etc. It will be a little different for your library. The second thing is you can pick up some 2-inch white letters and you can put literally little free library across the front and make it look more like a TARDIS. If you want to do it, you could also put library across one side and little across the other, or whatever combination you want. Whatever works. In any case, have fun. There's your little free library.